Good afternoon, everyone. Please continue to enjoy your salad, but I'm going to interrupt the conversation for just a moment to welcome you all to 2020 Korean American Day. It is a great privilege to open this. My name is Kathleen Stevens. I'm the head of KEI, which stands for Korea Economic Institute of America. We call it Korea Everything. And nothing is more important than I think what we do on this day of Korean American Day. And actually today is one of the few days when we're actually doing it on the day, which is January 13th. We have honorees here today. We have some very honored guests. I can't recognize everyone. I'll be introducing our speakers, obviously, and our honorees shortly. But I do want to say a special welcome to my friend from India, Deputy Secretary of State for Public Affairs in the East Asia Bureau, Walter Douglas. We worked together in New Delhi, of all places, and we spoke a secret language together called Korean, which of all the languages in India, no one spoke except us, as far as we knew. So, Walter, thank you so much for coming. I know of your support over the years for the role of literature, the role of culture in promoting understanding between our various countries, and we really appreciate all you're doing now at the State Department. And we also have former ambassador to the Republic of Korea, Tom Hubbard, and Joan Hubbard here, who also were so active during their years in Seoul and afterwards in promoting our relationship. A few of you have asked about, not many of you actually, some of your returns, but about Korean American Day. I'm not going to give a long speech because we have such a long program and a lot to do, as well as lunch. So I'm going to say read your program. Actually, there's a lot of information in there. But since 2005, so now 15 years ago, January 13th has been the date that the U.S. Congress has marked as Korean American Day. So somehow maybe 2005 was the year when, those people on the Hill, and welcome to those from the Hill who may be here, decided that they wanted to acknowledge the Korean American community, and in particular acknowledge that on January 13th, 1903 was the date of the first, at least kind of recorded, group of Korean immigrants arriving, in this case in Hawaii, which I guess at that time was not really a state, but anyway, but the first arrival of of Korean immigrants to the United States. KEI, our organization, has been marking this since 2008 with a gathering like this. And every year, I think we try, and again, you'll see in your program in past years, we try to highlight certainly outstanding individuals, and we have extraordinary individuals with us here today, as you all know, but also kind of highlight the extraordinary breadth and depth and diversity and inability to kind of classify in any way the sorts of contributions and participation and sort of enriching of American culture, Korean culture, world culture, by the growth of this extraordinary Korean American community, if we can call it a community. As some of you know, I first went to Korea. I'm not Korean American, obviously, but I went to Korea in 1975. It's a time when there was a lot of immigration to the United States, and I remember coming back in 1977 from Korea after 2 years, and there really wasn't much of a Korean American presence here that I was very aware of, and certainly growing up. And so, those of us who are in kind of the public policy business, we talk over the years about all the ways in which the U.S.-Korea relationship has changed, the incredible rise of the Republic of Korea, all that we see. I mean, this morning, how many, nominations did Parasite get for Oscars, right? 8, 9? It was incredible. Of all the things you could say which are so amazing about what have happened over the past few decades, to me, one of the most amazing and still not so remarked upon fact is the energy, the creativity, everything that has been contributed to this amazing country called the United States of America by this growth in Korean American immigration and activity over the last several decades. Today, the theme is novels, memoirs, essays, writing. We have professional people here to talk about it, so I'm not going to say it right. But what we've done at KEI is we've become like a little bit of a book club over the past few weeks, and it's been a great opportunity for us to read. As a person who spent her life, I was a career diplomat for many years. I always felt like sometimes you got a lot more about reading novels about things than you did about reading the official histories. And I remember, again, when I first went to Korea, there weren't too many Korean American writers, or for that matter, writers in English writing about Korea. But I remember the writer Richard Eunguk Kim, who wrote a book called Lost Names in the early 70s, and actually kind of about the Japanese experience, which one of our honorees has written deeply about, and had a big impact on me. And I remember things about that novel that, frankly, I don't remember all the thousands of pages of policy papers and history that I read, because it spoke to me at a human level, an emotional level, as well as at an intellectual level. So this year we have it's some remarkable writers here, Minjin Lee and Alexander Chee. Thank you so much for making the trip and they're going to be introduced properly later. My job now is to introduce our two speakers are kind of going to open up before we have lunch. Those of you who've been here before know you're in for, this is very Korean, we're going to make you kind of, there's a lot going on here. But we're very, very honored today to have the mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, here. To give us our congratulatory remarks. And then we're going to have Marie Arana, the literary director at the National Book Festival and the U.S. Library of Congress, to also speak to us. Mayor Park, you timed your visit very well for Korean American Day. We appreciate your coming to this lunch. Mayor Park was reelected for the third time as the mayor of Seoul, which last time I checked had a population of, 10 million plus. And he was reelected in June 2018. How long ago was I ambassador in Korea? I was ambassador to Korea before he was mayor, but he was doing something that was incredibly important, and that was building civil society and democracy. And Mayor Park, I know, just as Joan and Tom Hubbard know, we'll never forget the contributions you've made to the building of democracy in Korea and to the building of ties between the United States and Korea. So we look forward to your remarks first, and so you won't have to have me get up here again. I'm also going to say, after Mayor Park, we're going to ask Dr. Marie Arana to give a keynote address. She is as I mentioned, the literary director of the U.S. Library of Congress and the National Book Festival. I like the fact, I always knew, I'd never met her before, but I knew that she was editor-in-chief many years of the Washington Post literary section, Book World. And I also like the fact that she was named by the Washingtonian magazine as one of the most powerful people in Washington, which shows that power comes in many forms, and sometimes in forms where it's really deserved in Washington, and we're so honored to have you here. She's an accomplished writer herself, with a prize-winning biography of Simón Bolívar, novels on Latin America, Hispanic identity, biculturalism. I think we're going to have a very rich conversation today with our speakers and with our honorees. And with that, I'm going to ask Mayor Park to come and give his welcoming remarks. But please continue to enjoy your salad, and welcome to what I think will be a very interesting afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to have my old friends like Catherine Stephens and the former Ambassador Thomas Hubbard and Joan Hubbard. Actually, even before becoming mayor, I was making contact with Catherine, and she was really admitted to make presentation in front of civil society in Korea when I was the Secretary General of Hope Institute. So I was very glad, because the U.S. ambassador in Korea have never appeared in front of civil society. Then still I'm appreciating for that. And also, Joan Hubbard was, volunteering to the beautiful store, which is very similar to Oxfam in Korea, in Seoul. And she was every week dedicated a few hours to the beautiful store. So it may be very difficult to stand still for many hours every day. Is it all right? Are you healthy now? Great, thank you so much. So, owing to the such consideration and activities. So still many Koreans are still remembering all of your activities then. And also, I would like to thank for inviting me to be a part of this Korean American Day event today. Also, taking this opportunity, I would like to congratulate Minji Lee and the Alexander Chee, for being honored with the award today as well. Congratulations. And exactly 117 years ago, our Korean ancestors first set foot on the Hawaiian island. Probably the going to Hawaii was very difficult time for them because they have no high class seat in the boat. So they were the first Korean immigration to emigrate to the U.S. That was when the history of Korean immigration began in the U.S. So since then, 2 million were immigrated to U.S. and another 2 million to China, and the rest of 2 million to Japan. So now we have really brought Korean diaspora around the world. Yesterday, I had visited the grave of Hwa-sun Lee, the first Korean to receive the citizenship of the U.S. As I was paying my respects, I could feel the struggles and hardships that first initial Korean immigrants had to experience when they first came to the U.S. I believe that it was really thanks to the efforts that their descendants could settle down much more easily and comfortably to the U.S. The Korean community in the U.S. is now actively involved in spreading the message of peace and prosperity, not only within the U.S., but also around the world as well, based on their accumulated experiences, know-how, and their extensive networking skills. I'm confident that the future of the next generation is better and brighter because all of you here today are playing leading roles in each of your fields and positions. Korea is very proud of you. You are the strength and force of Korea. And as you may know, the recent atmosphere on the Korean Peninsula is very heavy due to the conflicts between North Korea and the US. Peace efforts have come to a standstill. But peace on the Korean Peninsula is directly related to not just the economic prosperity of the Korean Peninsula, but also that of the entire Northeastern Asian region as well. That is why we should make sure that the peace process continues and that our peace efforts bring about progress despite any obstacles that we might meet along the way. This can be possible only within the framework of a long-standing alliance between Korea and the US. I kindly ask all of you here today for your continuous interest in and support for resolving the peace issue on the Korean Peninsula. Today's event is very meaningful as it is a special time to promote harmony among the Korean community in the US and also honor the Korean Americans who have displayed their excellence in the US. Once again, thank you and congratulations, and I wish all of you and your families good health and great success. And I invite you to Seoul in someday to witness the recent development, wonderful achievement under my administration. Okay? Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to this splendid celebration, not only of Korean American Day, but of literature and of two really wonderful Korean American writers. It's a great honor to be here with you today to celebrate both the day and to honor two writers whom I greatly admire, Min-jin Lee and Alexander Chee. Congratulations to you both. I feel, though I am not Korean American, that by honoring Min and Alexander, we pay tribute to much, I believe, and value the diversity of the American experience, the importance of having artists who draw on their cultures to give us something entirely new, the need for us to recognize that we are a nation of many peoples, many stories. Most meaningful to me is the fact that we're here to recognize a fundamental generosity of spirit that is written into the nation's DNA, America's commitment to honor its many voices. Although I was born in Lima, Peru, I identify deeply with the stories and the characters that populate the work of these two extraordinary and very different writers. I don't say that just because Alexander and Min can tell a whopping good story, which they can. Anyone who reads their books will be transported and mesmerized by the worlds they create. I mean something else. What I want to say is that although we were born worlds apart, though our sensibilities have been shaped by other cultures, though our minds and hearts are tugged to different parts of the planet, we share something in common, a kind of hybrid and composite brain. Maybe it's because we are transplants or children of immigrants or crossbreeds. We cannot help but think deeply about who we are. We are bound somehow to those faraway origins. We cannot forget where we've been, what we've seen, who brought us to these shores, and how complicated that journey has been. We think hard about the face that stares back in the mirror, especially if it doesn't look like our neighbors or our schoolmates or our spouses or our children's. We become, as our American immigrant story unfolds, students of identity, Sherlock Holmeses of identity. We study the people around us. We parse ourselves in the process, not only by what we look like, sound like, or even believe in, but by what our allegiances might be. How Korean can we be exactly if we have lived most of our lives in America, or if we were born and bred in this country? And what does it mean to be a Korean American anyway? Or an Asian American, for that matter? I remember the first time I heard myself labeled a Hispanic American. I was in college, and it had never occurred to me that I was anything but a girl born in Peru, trying very hard to be an American. What could the words Hispanic American possibly mean? I was Peruvian just as someone would be from Panama or Argentina or Mexico or Puerto Rico or Uruguay. We might be indigenous, we might be black, we might be white, Asian, every race of man. It seemed nonsensical to be swept into one label. And so it is with the term Asian American, a conflation that makes little sense if you are Korean standing in a room full of Filipinos. And yet, in America, we take on those monikers, Asian American, Hispanic American, Indian American, Korean American, and those concocted identities. Why? Because being a people who have come from elsewhere, we become accustomed to being part of a larger narrative, a larger world. We become accustomed to seeing across cultures. We're people eminently able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. As a character in one of Alexander's novels said simply, and I quote, "Sometimes you don't know who you are until you put on a mask." And sometimes, unquote, and sometimes you don't know who you are until you try to squeeze yourself into a new home. I remember very clearly the first time that I read Maxine Hong Kingston's novel, Warrior Woman. I must have been 19 years old, still a teenager. Reading it, for me, was a life-changing experience. The book took my breath away. Wait, I thought as I read it. You could do that as a writer. You can pull in your ancestral ghosts just like that. You can use your family legends. You can employ a totally alien, totally quirky mindset. You can think in one language but write in another. You can merge dream with reality. It was that book, written by a Chinese-American author, played out in some mythic place that was more a bridge than home, that made me feel I might actually take up a pen, have something to say. The moment I read it, I felt transformed. So it was that I entered the world of literature. It never let me go. It was not a writer from a familiar culture that did this to me. It was a writer whose story came from the opposite side of the globe. What I didn't know was that Hong Kingston's novel was the herald of a new chapter in American literature. In my own lifetime, I have seen that seed of new American voice grow. It took root in the literary landscape already occupied by African-American giants, James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, Langston Hughes, and Jewish-American writers, Bernard Malamud, Saul Bellow, Isaac Bashevis Singer. In time, it blossomed to a great chorus of voices in which many immigrants and children of immigrants took part. Suddenly, by the 1970s and the 1980s, we had Asian American writers, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and then came those from the African diaspora, and then Arab Americans, Slavic Americans, Chicanos, Serbians, Afghans, Vietnamese. From Sandra Cisneros to Edwige Danticat, from Viet Thanh Nguyen to Thea Obrecht, we have become a nation richer not only by virtue of the vast American mosaic that these writers represent, but because of the uniquely American literature they have created from that experience. As for Korean American writers, I see a great bounty springing from a renaissance in general. In the 1950s, when I was born, Korea was struggling to stagger out from under the shadow of war and the difficult divisions that that war engendered. In the past quarter century, it has defied all prediction and become a nation noted for its successes, its pop star mania, its cutting-edge technology, its cars, its machines and appliances, its ships and steel. Along with that strong export commerce, it has also become a nation that exports a wildly diversified immigrant literature. This is not surprising. Koreans have a long literary heritage. You would not expect less from a nation that has been in existence for 4,000 years. All the same, the list of Korean American authors today is prodigious. It includes highly acclaimed prize-winning authors such as Chang Rae Lee, Heinz In-soo Fenkel, Susan Choi, Nora Okja Keller, Teresa Hak-yong Cha, David Yoon, and many more. And of course, it includes the prodigiously gifted, talented authors we're here to celebrate today, Alexander Chee and Min-jin Lee. According to Edmund White, one of this country's most illustrious critics, and I quote, "Alexander Chee is the best new novelist I've seen in some time. His novel, Edinburgh, is moody, dramatic, and pure." And that was said before Alexander produced so many more brilliant works. Alexander is mixed race, like me. He has a foreign-born father and an American-born mother. Like mine, his father came from far away to study engineering in this country. Like mine, his parents met in a building where, as fate would have it, they happened to be living. Alexander's parents in Azusa, California, mine in Boston, Massachusetts. For Alexander, as for me, Maxine Hong Kingston's work was transformative, a spur, a call to a future craft. So it's not surprising that we share the following opinion. You may be an Asian American writer, you may even be a Korean American writer, but chances are, though you share a past, a language, a culture, a history, you and the Korean-American writer sitting next to you will see the world in a different way. And then there is Min-Jin Lee, whom critics have called simply astounding. What Min has achieved is a miracle of conjury. As one reviewer said about her latest achievement, the epic novel Pachinko, quote, "Here is the sweep of Dickens and Tolstoy applied to the 20th century Korean family in Japan. Min-Jin Lee's Pachinko tackles all the stuff most good novels do: family, love, cabbage, but it also questions that have never been, it also asks questions that have never been more timely. What does it mean to be part of a nation? And what can one do to escape its tight, painful, familiar bonds?" Unquote. Such are the questions that these two Korean-American writers pose for us. In each of their works, we see essential, universal themes in the stories they tell us. There are equally essential reasons for us to understand that those stories are part of the America we are now. Diversity has always been our strength. In literature, as in life, we become greater, richer, more tolerant people as a result. On Korean American Day, I want to thank Min and Alexander for giving us more reasons to be proud of a Korean American heritage. And I want to thank them personally, from the bottom of my heart, for contributing to this gloriously complicated and composite American heart and brain. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hope everyone enjoyed your lunch. I would like to thank the Ronald Reagan Building for trying out the Korean-inspired food for the first time just for us. So hope you're enjoying the lunch. There's also dessert to be served shortly. So you'll be kind of surprised what they will be serving. So thank you all for being here. Happy Korean American Day. My name is Sang Kim. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at KEI, and I have the pleasure of running the Korean American Day every year. And every year I get so inspired by so many Korean Americans who have done such an amazing job in accomplishing so many things. And it doesn't matter which topic we choose every year. And this year I'm very honored to be moderating and be on the same stage with Alex Chee and Min-Jin Lee, two very distinguished authors and best-selling authors. And thank you so much for being here. I know your schedule is very crazy, but we're so glad that you can make it. And you have a lot of fans in the audience who are very excited to see you in person. So let's get started in learning more about them. So I want to start off by asking you about your beginnings. So what inspired you to become a writer, and what was the experience of publishing your first novel like?
Well, first I want to thank all of you for coming today. It would have been really embarrassing if you didn't show up. So, and I come from a culture based on shame. So I want to thank you for all of your efforts. I want to thank you for the video. I want to thank Marie for the beautiful speech. I think I will now start quoting, am I done now? I start quoting this idea of composite brain, because I think that is really how I work. So thank you. And thank you for the mayor for being here and all of my friends. I'm also particularly delighted to be on stage with Alex, because I have been a fangirl of his for a very, very long time. I remember when Edinburgh came out, I was so excited, and I read it twice. And one day, I actually brought his book and presented it to him, and he looked at me like, "Who are you, stalker person?" And behind the stage, and he signed it, and I was really delighted. So I'm super happy to be here. But to answer your question, I really don't think of being a writer as a job. And when I was growing up, I didn't want to be a writer. People are always so horrified that I say this. But I thought writers were they were nothing like me. I mean, I grew up fairly working class, and I didn't know anybody who was a writer. And then I went to college, and then I met real writers, and they looked nothing like me. So it was such a shock. I only became a writer because I thought I think I became a writer because I was stupid. And by this I mean, after I quit being a lawyer, I kind of thought it'd be so easy to publish a book. Yeah, see, stupid. Because it took me almost 12 years to see it become Free Food for Millionaires. And it took me almost 30 years of my life to write Pachinko.
Wow.
So it is not easy to write a book. But I'm a great reader. I really see myself as a reader, and in terms of answering your question quickly, I feel so deeply astonished to be part of a world in which the thing I love most in the world, books, where I can say I belong on that shelf with Alex, with Marie. That's a really cool feeling. But I wasn't going for that. I really just wanted to try something that was really hard.
I often think back, and I don't know that there was a single moment where I decided to be a writer exactly, but I just kind of kept doing it, and people kept encouraging me. I remember deciding to apply to a class in college with Phyllis Rose. That was a really transformational moment for me, was to decide to be educated in how to write fiction. But before that, I had already been encouraged by my English teachers in high school, in different ways. Everyone was always saying, "You should be a writer," and I just thought, like, well, how would you know? I even had a very funny encounter with Dr. Ruth Westheimer when I was a steakhouse waiter, working on my first novel.
Wow.
And she was seated in my section. She was eating by herself. I came up to check on how her meal was going, and she said, "You're not a waiter, are you?" And I thought, oh no, something terrible has happened. And then she said, "You're a writer, aren't you?" And I was thunderstruck. I'm just like in a white shirt with a bow tie, a steakhouse apron, running fillets around the dining room. And so that kind of thing has always been, people always sort of coming up to me and telling me to go do it. So in some ways, I almost feel like I am doing this because they said so. The publication of it was the question, like, what was it like to publish your first novel? For me, it was about, I really saw it as planting a flag in the culture. I was so tired of people being surprised by who I was, surprised by the elements of my story. I was tired of looking for some sign that there had been someone like me before me. And so for me, it was very much, in addition to having written the novel and wanting it to be in the world, it was also about an assertion of an identity. To say, like, I'm Korean American, I am mixed race, I am gay. These are the stories that I'm going to start telling you now that this book is out there. So it meant a lot, and it's meant a lot to have, stories come back to me. That's the thing about publishing a book, right? Is that you tell them a story, and then they want to tell you one. My friend Jean Lee, who's here today, I think the last time I was here in DC, I met a friend of hers who told me a story about friends of hers in Seoul who had a book club, a gay couple. One was white, one was Korean. They were not out to their friends. And they chose my book to test the reaction of their friends and see if they could come out to them. And that was a really beautiful experience to have with that. And now it means a lot to me that novel has been translated into Korean and will appear later this year.
Great. So in the video, Minjin, you mentioned art must be edifying and entertaining. So I'm sure that's a very delicate balance to have. And As Asian American authors, both of you, do you feel like there is a certain topic that you're expected to write about, such as like immigrant story, or how do you balance between what you want to write, but what would be, selling in the market?
Oh, I never thought my books would sell well. Because who cares about the Korean Japanese people? I mean, that's pretty much the response that I got when I told people that I was working on this book. And I'm terrible at the elevator pitch. So when people would ask me, what are you writing about? I would say, Korean Japanese discrimination? And who'd want to read that? But I think for me, because I believe the books that I love to read must be edifying and entertaining, I wanted to write that kind of book. And the edification part was very easy for me, because I love sukje, homework. So I loved reading, and I loved studying, and I loved the researching part. But that book that I wrote was terrible. But in order for me to learn how to be a novelist, that was an entirely different training. Because in order to keep people reading your work and to not watch Netflix, that's master level.
That's hard.
And that really took me the longest time. It wasn't actually learning how to write something of value that's worth sharing. I mean, I teach writing, and when I teach writing, I talk about that all the time.
And for you?
I try not to think about it. I try not to think about what they expect. I remember having a short conversation with my agent. I said, well, I feel like what readers want, and she's like, readers want adult coloring books. She's like, don't tell me what readers want. Write whatever you want to write, and don't think about it. Don't think about what they want. And I was like, okay. So I try to, and this is also what I teach my students, is I try to look for stories I know that are in the world that I've never read, never seen in a book, and try to bring those forward, and to think about these sorts of ways in which I can make that which is visible here, visible here. That's really, I think, it sounds very boring, I know, and so there's a lot of sex in them, which I try to make as interesting as possible.
I mean, writing a book is really hard to do, right?
Yes.
So in the video, both of you mentioned the community, and of course we're here to celebrate the accomplishment of Korean American community. I wanted to hear your thoughts on where Korean American authors are, if there is a community, and how it has changed over the years compared to your beginning of your writing stage.
There's so many more Korean American writers that are getting attention who rightfully deserve to get attention today. That said, very often, I think there's a problem of tokenism, which I've spoken about, is that very, very often, because of, I think, a very unfair white supremacist idea that there can only be one good minority person, and I use that word minority ironically, that's very troubling. I think that what's really important is to have a great diversity of many different kinds of people in your community. I feel very strongly about being Korean American, and I like it. I like Koreans. Now, me saying that is actually a radical gesture, because I have met many Koreans and Korean Americans who don't like Koreans, because I've interviewed Koreans around the world, and very often they'll tell me privately, well, I like you, but I don't like to do business with Koreans. And I'm so in shock. And I kind of think, really? Do you know Koreans? Because we're kind of fun. But so I want to say that. I want to talk about that diversity and the complexity of the prejudices and the unfairness that Koreans have internalized, I believe, from horrible governments, in order for us to understand that we don't even give Koreans a fair chance. And I really, really hope that Koreans give Koreans a fair chance. I think that's really important.
It's incredibly exciting to me to go from being in a writing class where a teacher says, in the 80s, like, well, maybe you'll be the first Korean American writer, and this is because no one remembered Young Hil Kang, And it was really thrilling to me to then find Young-Hil Kang, who wrote about being a Korean immigrant to America and about the intense devastation of the Japanese occupation in the 30s, the 1930s, and was a Guggenheim winner twice over, and doing it all as a stateless person. Like in his Guggenheim application, he wrote in for nationality like stateless. He was and is still a kind of a huge figure in my mind as I see this this crowd of new voices: Reese Kwan, Fanny Choi, Crystal, Hana Kim. There's all of these.
Paul Yoon.
Yeah, Paul Yoon. All these incredible new writers now. Eugenia Kim as well. It's exciting. And someone asked me recently, like, if I thought it was like a boomlet or something that was going to go away. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think these are writers whose voices are here to stay, whose stories are here to stay, and that increasingly, for all that we face, the kinds of white supremacy that you're talking about, there's still a way in which I think increasingly people think of Koreans as a part of the American story.
And it's really great to see more Korean voices being represented in the literature area. But in addition to Korean American voices, what other works would you like to see more represented and voiced in American literature?
Well, first, I hope that we increase our reading. So I would like for us to read more, because I think that when I read something, for a chapter of something, and that may take 20 minutes, I usually get significantly more information than scrolling for an hour on the internet or on my phone. So one of the things that I really share with young people when I talk to them is the importance of books and articles and really well-written things. So that's one thing. But in terms of representation, I think this is an exciting time. I would like to see more indigenous literature. That's important to me. I would like to see more Latinx representation. I would like to see more transgender ideas. I think that's missing too. Single sex marriages, that kind of stuff in literature. And I think there's a lot of room for it. And I was so personally affected by African American literature in my growth as a writer. And I feel an enormous debt to not just the civil rights work that African Americans have done in this country, but also the great, beautiful literature they've made. So I'm always really excited to see more.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Alex?
I feel much the same way. I think, in particular, I've been trying to read more Native American writers and looking at how I can support that also. More trans voices, more Muslim voices, Muslim American voices, especially, and especially Muslim American women writers. And I think there's also refugee literature is something that we're seeing more of, people describing the refugee experience, and I think that's going to be an important story for us to pay attention to as we enter this new period.
Right. As I was organizing this event, I also felt like I should read more because there's so many books that I haven't read. So I encourage everyone to read their books, which we are selling outside for a discounted price. It's cheaper than Amazon, so please do buy them. So literature can be a really powerful tool for people to really understand different perspective and think from someone else's shoe, right? And it could also be a lens to look at the current issues, and especially for Minjin, you write about Korea, Japan. And especially, and for us in DC, Korea-Japan tension in recent months was a huge issue. So from your book, what message would you like to send to your readers in terms of how to understand Korea-Japan relations?
Well, I think it's interesting to me because I have done these sort of large events. So I've had the great opportunity to meet so many of my readers. And having met readers of my work, thankfully, around the world, what's interesting and curious, perhaps, to Korean Americans is that most of my readers are not Korean American. So I've had so many people come up to me who are of African descent, Jewish descent, Muslim descent. People, like, it's a bestseller in Holland, Ireland, New Zealand. So it's so weird for me because I didn't think I'd ever publish it. Like, I really thought that maybe a third-tier academic press might publish it for free. And I think it's a reasonable assumption because there's never been a book about Korean Japanese, a novel for adults in English ever. So when I meet these people, they're often saying things like, well, I didn't know about the hostility between Korean and Japanese people. And I think that makes a lot of sense because I've had many people tell me, oh, the Koreans and the Japanese, they don't like each other. Just like that, as a statement, as if there's parity in their dislike, not a history of harm. And I think that's really troubling. Now, that said, history is history and today is today. And I believe very strongly that unless South Korea and Japan work out their differences, we will not be able to control North Korea and China. And we will not have peace in the region. So geopolitical alliances are really important, but I don't think true peace can actually exist without telling the truth in history. And for me, I feel very strongly that that truth must come out. And in Pachinko, I think the Japanese are rendered very compassionately. My husband is half Japanese, so my son is a quarter Japanese. So I would never, ever, in a wholesale way, say the Japanese people, especially people of today, are bad. That's a very simplistic way of looking at the world.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is a really complex relations to begin with.
Sure. Yeah.
And for Alex, in your novel and also a lot of your essays, you do talk a lot about being true to yourself and also identity. So what do you hope your readers to really learn from your work?
I think in some ways it almost doesn't matter what I hope. Because what happens is what happens for them. But I think one thing that I've really loved over the years is having all these very different people tell me how much they've connected to the things I've written. That's one of the most enjoyable parts about that. I think, in particular, I try to encourage Korean American, LGBTQ folks when I'm at my events, Asian American, LGBT possible future writers, to think about how they deserve their place in this life and in our literature, and to keep making the work that we need to see from them, to see the stories that only they can tell. And you know, the way in which, whether it ranges from, you know, the experience of being Korean American in Maine, like which is part of my first novel and my essay collections, or the idea of being the oldest son who kind of gives up on his role in the family, as well as is kind of forced out. Or whether it's, you know, trying to figure out why your parents won't tell you anything about what they went through during the war. All these kinds of stories and silences both, you know, are what I'm thinking about and what I'm hoping folks are pursuing in themselves.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of diversity and complex and characters, so in both of your books, there are a lot of characters that are introduced within the novel. I'm wondering if there was any favorite that you really, really feel really attached to in any of your works? And also, a common theme that I found among all of your books is that there's always a struggle between what the society will expect that character to be versus what the character wants to be. So what do you hope to relay, what do you hope for the readers to take away from that struggle?
Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm a terrible introvert. So being here is terrifying. And I've worked through a great deal of therapy as well as public speaking classes in order to do this. Now, why do I mention this? I mention this because I think that the world expects Asian American women to be a certain way, and I've had to behave in the opposite way at different stages of my life. So when I was young, I was just expected to be quiet, and that was fine because I was quiet. And then now that I've become an author and I've been asked to speak about some very difficult issues, and recently I was in Australia and they put me on a panel with a bunch of experts about North Korea, and I was deeply unqualified. There are a lot of experts here, so you know how unqualified I am. And I remember having to talk about things and to opine, and all those things required a great deal of going against my own personality, because you have identity, which is obviously a composite brain, and you also have human personality, which is really different. So cultural expectations is something that I have to fight constantly in order to function. But to answer your question, saying, I think that I can fight and I'm willing to do the homework in order to become better or to act differently if I believe that the value is important. So if I think the value is important, then I'll stretch. But very often, it's incredibly uncomfortable for me to talk to strangers, to give speeches, and to even be on panels, even when I'm with friendly people.
Well, you sound great. I'm more terrified than you are, so you're in a good hand.
Favorite character, though?
Oh, favorite character, thank you. See? Unqualified. Yeah, favorite characters, my favorite characters are my villains. You can't write good fiction without people who are the anti-heroes. And I really like my anti-heroes because they're very sexy to me. Cool stuff happens when my anti-heroes show up. And very often when I teach writing, I talk about my students who love their protagonists so much, but then they have these straw man counter characters, and then nothing really happens in the work. So I always think you have to have a worthy rival. So I love my worthy rivals, who are Ted in Free Food for Millionaires and Hansu in Pachinko.
Let's see. Do I have favorite characters? I mean, I still greatly love the main character of my first novel, V. And then the Queen of the Night, the best friend of the main character is a kind of wild child courtesan named Euphrosyne, who she was probably the most fun to write. And then also my antagonist in that novel as well, the Comtesse de Castiglione.
Really sexy, right?
Yeah, she literally was.
Literally, yeah.
She's a figure in history. You can look up pictures of her. She's the most photographed woman in the 19th century. I wondered if it was by design, if she knew that most people back then only had 1 or 2 photos of her, and she arranged to have hundreds taken of her. And then what was the other part of the question? Like something about society, social expectations.
Right. So there are characters in the book that that struggle with the societal expectations, but also kind of go against that societal expectations. So.
Right. I mean, society is really the real antagonist, right? Accept your place inside of our engine of commerce and do what we need you to do and don't complain about it. Everybody else. I think there's the reward of doing what's expected of you sometimes is a kind of poverty that is so impossible to endure that it almost can't be described. And the limited imagination of the people who plan for you also is also what you're up against. People who don't know you and never will, but they have created a situation that will control your entire existence, whether you know it or not. And so a lot of times what I'm trying to do in my books is to get people to just even see that, if they can, to see how these histories, these laws have shaped their lives in ways that they don't even know.
So both of your books are very popular and been doing so well. So I'm just curious, what are you working on nowadays, and what's kind of next step for you, and when should we expect the next book?
Oh golly, I'm such a slow writer. So my next project is a work of nonfiction. It's called Name Recognition. It's a memoir of voice and visibility. And the reason why I'm writing it is because I was asked to, and I'm really afraid of writing it because I'm a coward. I don't want to write all the stuff that I guess I have to write about. But one of the things that motivated me to write that book, it's a work of nonfiction, is that I was really troubled by how Asian Americans who have foreign-sounding names are really treated very badly in America. So, and I have chosen to have my name Min Jin Lee. I was asked if I would like to change my name when I came to America, and I liked my name, so I kept it, but it has had consequences. So I wanted to write a little bit about that. But the real thing that I love is my next novel, which is called American Hagwon, and I've been researching this book forever. And a Hagwon, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a tutoring center. So I'm studying the role of education and what it means for Koreans around the world, and that will be a work of fiction.
And do you know when it will be finished, by any chance?
I knew she was going to come back with that. Well, my publishers would like it if I could submit it sometime this year.
Wow.
I know.
It's only January, so you have some time.
Yeah. So that's I guess my memoir, it's going to be 2020 expectation of being delivered. But they could reject it and say it's horrible, and I'd have to write it again. And the novel isn't due for another 2 years.
Let's see. I'm working on another essay collection. It's called Rich Children. And it is like 2/3 done. It's much like the first one. It's a combination of essays that I've already published elsewhere and then some new essays. And then I also have a novel and stories that I'll just call it a novel. My agent gets nervous when I call it a novel and stories. It's set across 40 years in the life of a Korean-American gay man named Jack Cho. And it starts with him in 1985 and goes into the future to 2025. So I want to publish it before then. And I'm hoping I have that also. It's comprised of sections of things that I've been working on since the 90s. So, but I finally figured out the whole structure of the book, and I hope to have it done, or at least submitted to a publisher sometime this year. So, looking at 2022, I guess, for these books.
I'm not pressuring on you to finish your book right away, but we are looking forward to your next essays and next book. So unfortunately, this is all the time we have today with honorees, because they agreed to stay a little longer and sign the books. So I do want to give people time to go out and buy, and so you can get it signed. I think we did a great job of not spoiling any of the books. So if you're curious, you can go out and buy the books. I'm sorry? Sure, we'll take a question.
Oh. Have I? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Did you go to the Japan, or anybody ask with the Japanese over here?
So this is Katie O, a real expert on North Korea. So to answer your question, gosh, this is such a controversial question. So I have spoken in Tokyo to the foreign press. So I've spoken to almost every person of the foreign press at the club who came, and it was sponsored by the foreign press of Japan. And they really, really want this book to be out there. It has been published by, it has been purchased by the publisher Bungei Shunju. However, it has not yet been published. So I don't know what that means. And I think at this point, the term of expiration of expectation of publication has come. So we'll have to see what happens. But so many Korean Japanese people, Jeilgyopo, have contacted me. I get letters every day. And they have been so deeply supportive and kind and loving. So I feel deeply gratified by all the research that I did, because had I not done that research, I think I wouldn't have had the confidence to speak about it. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both again for being here, and I would like to give another round of applause for both of our honorees. So next I would like to invite Ambassador Stevens and Mayor Park back on the stage to give award presentation.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come here and spend some time with us today. And I would like to say we have a small token we'd like to give you, but as you can see, it's perhaps not too small. But we do have something we hope you take with you and that you can remember this day by. And with that, I would like to take and present to Minjin Lee a plaque in honor of today's Korean American Day. And then Alexander Chee. All right, well, I would like to thank everyone today for joining us. This concludes our Korean American Day for 2013 for some reason, 2020. But I do want to remind you before you head out, if you'd like, these wonderful authors have been gracious enough to set aside some of their time to take and sign their books, which are also on sale outside. So with that, thank you again.